Hello everyone, and welcome to what I think is episode 8 of Speckled Red Knits, the podcast. My name is Julianne. I'm a knitter from Cleveland, Ohio. I also do some other crafts too, which I always say I do, but I never show them on here. It's been a little while since I filmed our last episode. I meant to check before I did this, and I think it was probably like back the very end of November. Was when I put out the last episode, so it's been a minute. I kind of got carried away with holiday knitting and just like the holidays in general. I did a lot of gift knitting. I think in the last episode I said that my goal was to not knit anything for anyone else during the month of December, and that didn't happen at all. So just between knitting so much for other people and the holidays and COVID, it's been a minute since we filmed an episode. I don't have a ton to show you, but I do have a lot to talk about. So sit down, grab a cup of something warm, and let's get into some knitting. So the only finished object I have to show you for this podcast is this pair of mittens. Aren't they so cute? You might be asking, why do they look so different? The reason they look so different is because I knit them with this yarn that it's kind of similar to Spin Cycle, how it's that barber pole way of, I guess, you dye the wool first and then when it's spun, it's like a barber pole. I don't really know what it's called. Dyed in the wool? I don't know. Anyway, so my local yarn store I paid a visit to in December because I knit these little ornaments. They're about that big. These little Scandinavian ornaments from a Carne and Arlos book that I don't have to show you because I gave them to my aunt for Christmas. And so I went up there to pick up just some red and white, like fingering weight yarn to knit these ornaments in. And they had this whole table of bulky weight yarn from, it's called Feederbrook Farms. And they do that style of like yarn spinning that's similar to Spin Cycle. And they had, it was kind of like a run of unique ones. And so they had a big selection on this table at my local yarn store. And I tried to talk myself out of buying it, and I was really close to doing it, and then I did it. I just bought it. So anyway, so if you've ever knit with Spin Cycle, you know that like it's not all one color, and the colors shift because of the way that it's dyed before it's spun. So they look similar but different. This yarn is just 100% wool. I can't remember what it's called, what breed it is. But I knit the cuffs and thumbs with some yarn. I think it's not Malabrigo, it's Manos. And I got it from my fiber share partner last round. The pattern I used is Tin Can Knits. It's their World's Simplest Mittens, or World's Easiest Mittens. I can never remember. But it's a great pattern, and it is knit for every weight of yarn. So it goes from fingering all the way up to bulky, and it is knit for every size. So like toddler up to adult. And it's 100% free, and it's great. And it is a mitten pattern that I always use. So I think that I used the bulky pattern for this, which I believe is like a size 6 needle for the cuff and a size 8 for the body. I probably could have gone down to like the worsted because it is a bulky weight, but it's not like super bulky. I would call it more of like an Aran weight. And I really like how these they're like different, but they match, they go together. And I just think that's really fun. And I really like these. I actually knit these in a single day at work. We just had like a slow day. We didn't have a lot of calls. And I knit these, and then I wore them the next morning. I work a 24-hour shift, so I knit them like during the day, and then overnight. And then to the next morning, I got to wear them to shovel the snow off my car. And it was great. And even though I think I could have gone down like a needle size, they're still very warm. What I actually did, because I found that they were just a tiny bit loose, like the gauge was a little bit loose, was I blocked these. So, well, I didn't really block them. I just, like soaked them in wool wash and got a lot of the moisture out. And then I put them in the dryer, which is a little risky because this is not superwash wool. But it did exactly what I wanted it to. And it just like squished them right up. Just kind of made the fabric a little bit denser. And now they're great. And I'm really glad I did that. I was really scared of the dryer for a long time because like you're not supposed to put your hand knits in there. But you know what? If you need to like firm things back up, because knitting does get loose, the dryer is a really great tool. I wouldn't recommend putting something in there that's soaking wet. I would get a lot of the moisture out, and if you're really worried about it, kind of like check on it periodically. But it really can be a great tool for keeping your knits looking new. I knit Jordan hats all the time, and I just did that with a couple of his hats. They were kind of stretched out, and I just some of them were like non-superwash. I think a couple of them were superwashed, so I soaked them in wool wash and then like squeezed out all the water and put them in the dryer, and it like shrunk them back up just enough that they're like wearable again. So if you have like neglected knits that are kind of stretched out, I recommend sticking them in the dryer, but being careful about it. Although, I don't know, I just put these in there and walked away for a while. But it turned out great. And I really like these mittens. And that's the only finished object I have for you this week. So, although I didn't have a lot of finished objects to show you this week, I do have a couple of works in progress. So like I said, I did a lot of gift knitting for Christmas. I knit my mom a sweater, I knit Jordan a sweater, and I normally only knit one sweater for Christmas a year. I have like a list that rotates, and I knit one person off the list a sweater for Christmas. And that was my mom this year. But I had a lot of Brooklyn tweed yarn that I had purchased when they kind of did their pandemic fundraiser for local yarn shops. I don't exactly remember how that worked, but they did have a sale on their yarn, and I bought a lot of it. And I had this sweater's quantity of button jar, which is kind of like a bluey green. Well, it's not really a bluey green. It's kind of like a Kelly green, but with like tweedy flecks in it. And I decided that Jordan needed a sweater for Christmas this year, so I knit him a sweater. And I knit my dad's socks. I knit ornaments that I sent to my aunt, and I made a little quilt sampler wall hanging for my grandma for Christmas. And I knit hats for Jordan's family. I'm like, what else is taking up all my time? I knit 4 hats that I sent off as Christmas gifts. So I did a lot of knitting. And I also just remembered that I finished knitting that little pig that I showed on this episode, and I sent that off to my friends for their baby. So I did a lot of gift knitting. A lot of gift knitting. I normally, you know what, I never commit to it at first, and then it just happens. Like, I'm just like, you know what, I think they would really like this. And then it just gets added to the list. And I'm going to try not to do that next year, or this year. I guess it's already this year. Because, I don't know, how do you all feel about gift knitting? It kind of like, I feel like a small amount is good. Like if I had done the 2 sweaters, that would have been great. But I don't know, it just like drains me. I feel like I don't want to knit. Like I'm just, there's a time crunch, and you're knitting it for someone else. And I mean, I'm a selfish knitter. I like to knit for myself. I feel like that's why I knit so much, is because I know that I get the item at the end. And I do like knitting for other people, but I just did so much of it. So I don't know. Every year I say I'm going to start knitting for other people like in the summer, and then I'll put it away, and that never happens. But I think this year I'm finally going to do it. This year was better than last year. Last year I was still knitting for other people like through Christmas. So I at least finished a week before Christmas, which was good, but I don't know. It was still a lot. So anyway, I don't have a lot of finished objects, but I do have some works in progress that I started. So the first work in progress is this sweater, which is called the Bright Side Sweater. And the pattern is from Espace Tricot, and it's totally free on Ravelry. It is a fingering weight sweater that they originally knit in Rauma, which is I think it's a Scandinavian wool. And it's kind of like, it's a really like classic yarn that you use for color work. It comes in a lot of colors, and it's like a toothier wool. I had this yarn that I bought when the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival was happening. I did not buy it from there because it actually didn't happen this year, but it kind of happened online. But it is called Mohawk Lite. I think Mohawk is a sheep breed, maybe. I don't know really. But it's by Jill Draper. She makes a lot of like breed specific wools, and she kettle dyes all of her yarn. So she mostly just does tonals, and they're really beautiful. So I picked up 2 skeins of this, and each skein was like 550 yards. So it was a lot for a fingering weight. I do think it's like slightly thinner than a fingering weight. Maybe just like a tiny bit. I don't really know. I don't knit with fingering weight that much. So, it does have a nice twist to it, though. I feel like it looks like it's a regular fingering weight, and then when you knit with it, when you put a little tension on it, it does kind of thin a little bit. But it's very, very soft. When I got the yarn, I noticed that there was like a lot of lanolin still on it, and I've never washed yarn skeins before I knit with them, except for this time. I don't know. It just felt like it needed it. Obviously, like the yarn wasn't like dirty. Like it might have just been spinning oil that was left on it. But I did wash them. Like I just soaked them in some wool wash and let them dry before I knit with them. And it did feel a lot different after I did that. And I'm glad I did that. But the yarn, it's really hard to tell what color it is. And I'm not sure what color it's going to show up on screen. In low light, it looks black, but it is a very, very dark green. It kind of has like some lighter bits where you can definitely see that it's green, but then like there, like right up here, this looks like pretty dark. But I'm really excited to have this sweater. It was a free pattern, so that was really great. And what else do I have to say about it? I don't really have any sweaters like this. Just like a solid color in like such a dark color. Like I don't have anything like this in my wardrobe. So I'm really excited to have this finished. One thing to note about the pattern is that it is meant to be like a little bit oversized. I want to say the smallest finished bust measurement that it's written for is like a finished bust circumference of 43 inches. So, typically I want to say like the smallest size, but like finished bust circumference a pattern includes is like a 37 or a 35. So for like 43 to be the smallest size, like it's supposed to be worn with a lot of positive ease. So I think I ended up knitting a 43, which is, like I said, the smallest size that you could, just because I don't want like a ton of positive ease. That's not really, I don't know, I don't like that. So also that would have been a lot of stitches to knit on fingering weight yarn. Although one thing to note is that it is knit with like fairly large needles. I want to say these are 7. Yes, these are 7. So like you get a much kind of like drapier fabric than you would if you're knitting fingering weight with like, a size 4 needle, which is like, I think pretty typical for fingering weight, like a size 4. But yeah, I'm really enjoying knitting on this. It's so easy. I just keep it in my bag that I take to work, and it's just something easy that I can pick up and put down. The top has twisted rib, which I've actually never knit before, which is really nice. I think I've heard people say that it's kind of annoying to knit, but I didn't find it too annoying. It does have you do short rows. The only complaint I had about the short rows are that the way that they wrote the instructions, you know, typically for short rows, it'll say, you know, knit past like the stitch marker for the left sleeve and then back to the stitch marker for the right sleeve. And the pattern, the instructions said like knit to the raglan marker. And I assume what that meant was the marker for the back and like for the body stitches, which typically in a pattern say for the front stitches and for the back stitches, and then they say for the left sleeve stitches and the right sleeve stitches. And I knew what marker they meant, but it got really confusing when you were knitting back around because you have two raglan markers, right? If you're assuming that like the body stitches, the markers for the body stitches are the raglan markers, it gets kind of confusing which ones the pattern is referring to when, you know, they're like 4 and it could be either of those. So I kind of boofed the raglan or the short rows. I did some of them, but I didn't do all of them. So I guess we'll find out how that looks in the end. But I think it'll be fine because like it wasn't that many short rows that I did end up doing. It was just like a few, and in like it's a fingering weight. So like what was that going to be, like that much extra height on the back? I don't think it'll be a big deal. But I did find those short rows confusing. I hate doing short rows in general. If I could leave them out, I would. But this pattern specifically, it was very unclear, like how to do the short rows. So it is a free pattern. Can't complain too much. But if you knit this sweater, that is just something to note. I think I'm getting close to being done with the body for this. I think it's at like 8 inches now, so I don't have too much more to do. Maybe I'll have it done for the next podcast. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this sweater, and I'm excited to get it off the needles and wear it because I think it'll be a really nice part or a piece of my wardrobe. My other work in progress is a colorwork sweater that I've been wanting to knit for so long. Actually, I think this is the back. I only know that because of all the short rows. So this sweater pattern is called, I think it's called Winter Soul. I always want to call it Winterfell, which I think is like the Game of Thrones fort or something. Anyway, so I wanted to knit the sweater for a long time. I got a sweater's quantity of this color. It's called Honey. It's by Quince & Co. and their Lark Base, which is their worsted weight yarn. A couple years ago for Christmas, I asked for it, and I was going to knit a cardigan with it, but I found that this yarn doesn't necessarily hold up as well in like a cardigan. So like for a cardigan, I like a really like sturdy wool because I think they just get more wear on them than like a pullover. And so I didn't knit a cardigan with it, and I just had it like sitting in my stash and I wasn't doing anything with it. And I found this pattern maybe a year ago, and I really wanted to knit it with this as the main color. And I had these 2 skeins of Quince & Co., the Lark Base, just in my stash left over from other things. So the light pink, this is called Clay, and the red is called Maple. I love that red so much. I would knit a sweater out of it, just the whole sweater. And the pattern is knit. I think I had a hard time getting gauge because the pattern is knit with size 6 needles. I did go up a needle size to the colorwork yoke because I found that to be really helpful in keeping the gauge consistent. But the reason I had trouble knitting this pattern and the reason why it's languished for so long is because they have you knit a provisional cast on at the widest part of the yoke. So there's like 300 stitches that you cast on, and you knit with like waste yarn, and then you do the short row shaping for the back, and then you knit the yoke up and you do decreases. And I just did not want to do that. Like, that's the worst. Like starting with 300 stitches and you have to like knit an inch in waste yarn, and then you have to start with the short rows, the worst part of knitting a sweater. I just like could never bring myself to do it. And so I finally decided, I'm like, I just can't, like, I've had this yarn for so long. I just need to knit this pattern. Like, I love the colors together. And I really wanted this pattern. And so I cast it on. At first, it looked like it was too many stitches because it's like 300 stitches. It's like the widest part of the sweater. It's so hard to know if it's going to fit because, like, you have all the sleeve stitches and the body stitches, and they're just on, it's like one big tube. And, like, you have no idea how that's going to fit. So I took out all the waste yarn that I knit with, and I cast on for the size down from what I was going to knit, which it was also hard to pick a size because the size I normally knit, they didn't write it for. It was like I had to pick between two. So it looked so big, so I took that out. 300 stitches. So, like, it wasn't, that was like an hour that it took to do that. Okay. So I recast on for the size down. I knit it. I finished the short rows. I'm getting ready to start the color work. I twisted the stitches. Come on. Like, really? Really? So I try to save it by, like, I'm like, oh, I'll just cut this one part by where the arm will be, and I'll steek it. Didn't work, obviously. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm not doing this again. Like, the short rows took forever. It was just awful. I'm like, I'm not knitting it like this. So what I ended up doing was I rewrote the chart so that I increased stitches rather than decrease. So I increased rather than decreasing, and I started from the top down because I couldn't do it anymore. I really could not knit that from the yoke up again. I couldn't do it. I didn't have a needle that was, like, long enough so that it could accommodate 300 stitches in the round without, like, so they were spread out enough so that I could see that, like, I hadn't twisted them. Like, I couldn't do it. So I took, like, an hour and I rewrote the chart. And I'm glad I did it because I don't know if I could have knit this sweater if I hadn't done that. I think it just drove me crazy. So that is my comment about the construction of this sweater, is that I hated it. At least the first part. So this sweater actually looks like it's kind of small right now because of the cord I have it on. But there are a lot of stitches scrunched up in here, and I know it'll be fine once I knit some more of it. So the pattern, I can't do that. That provisional cast on, like, I wasn't going to do it. I don't like it. I don't really, there were some, like, directions in the pattern about why they did that, and I don't totally understand it, but I didn't like it. That aside, it is a lovely little motif, and I do like it a lot now. It's still kind of wrinkled up. I feel like colorwork sweaters, you just have to, like, really wet block it. Like, you cannot just, especially when they're in, like, woolly wools like this. I feel like superwash is probably a little bit different, but you just really have to block a regular colorwork sweater in, like, non-superwash wool to get it to lay nicely. I already told you what the yarn was, what the colors were. Aside from the horrible construction, I do like the sweater. I'm trying this method where I knit something more complicated. So I have something more complicated on the needles and then something that's really easy. So when I got to the point in the other sweater I showed you where I just got to the body and it was just real easy stockinette, I cast this on. And so whenever I had, like, time to actually sit down and look at the chart and knit, I did this sweater, and when I didn't, I knit my other sweater. So I actually really like it. I'm typically a pretty monogamous knitter, and so I just like to see something through to the end, and I only knit on one thing. And that's great, but sometimes I find myself in a pickle where I have knitting time, but I might not be able to be like really focused. And if the sweater that I'm working on, the only project I have, is still in like a colorwork yoke, that's kind of hard to do. So this method, I might not get as many sweaters done as quickly, but I think it's better in the long run. So now I'm just on to the body. I only have maybe like 2 inches of it knit. You do knit a ton of short rows on this, like quite a few. The whole back, I want to say there's probably across the back maybe like 1.5 inches of short rows, which is quite a lot. So you knit some, if you're knitting the pattern as it says, you would knit the provisional cast on and knit the short rows through the back and then knit up, and then you would, take out the cast on, and then you do more short rows, and then you knit the body. So it's a lot of short rows. What I did was, after I finished the yoke and divided for the sleeves, I did the short rows for the back, and then I did a second set of short rows. So it wasn't really like a difficult change to make. This is mostly 2-stranded color work, except for like this little area at the bottom. I think there are like 2 or 3 rows where it's 3-stranded, which is so annoying to knit. I wish I had nicer things to say about this sweater. I do like it, and I'm happy that I'm done with the color work, and I'm happy that I'll have it. But like, man, like there was one night when I'm like, I just need to like make some progress on this, because I sunk like 6 hours into it and I have nothing to show for it because I just like had to keep ripping out. But yeah, I'm excited to finish this and have it because I've had the yarn for so long, and I'm just excited to get it out of my stash and have this sweater that I wanted for so long. So I have one more work in progress to show you. Before I do, I just wanted to tell you about the sweater I'm wearing right now before I forget. It is called, I forgot, I can't pronounce it. I'll link it in the comments. It's like a French-Canadian town. That's the name of it. And I can't pronounce it, and I'm really sorry about that. But I will put the link to the pattern in the comments. But I knit this sweater a couple years ago, but I was knitting the same pattern again in previous episodes. It was kind of that green sweater. I was knitting like it's kind of like a citron color. That is the same pattern. I knit it in this one first. This yarn is called Andromeda, and it's by House of a la Mode. I think I bought the yarn a while ago. This is the first like splurge yarn that I bought. And I love this sweater so much. I wear it a ton. I don't know if you can see, but there are just so many like different colors in each stitch. Like each stitch is almost a different color. It's just really beautiful yarn. It's a DK weight sweater, and it's really easy to knit. It has this cool like shirt tail hem where you kind of like split the front and back stitches and you do like short rows. It's really lovely. It's a nice little detail. It does have the neck is supposed to be like a rolled stockinette hem, but what am I talking about? Ribbing? Neckline. The neckline is supposed to be a rib or a rolled stockinette, but I thought I would get annoyed by that, so I didn't do it. I just cast on ribbing. So that is the sweater I'm wearing, just so I don't get comments about it. But the last work in progress I have is not much to write home about. It's just a sock. So I had this yarn that I had bought when I was knitting my first Vertices Unite because I needed another color and I didn't quite know what it was going to be. So I bought 2 skeins. And this is one of the skeins I bought. And it is a yarn by Primrose. She does a lot of hand-dyed yarns, but she also works with like a local mill now. And she makes some of her own yarn bases. So she does kind of that barber pole yarn, the color changing yarn that, is similar to like what Spindrift does. I don't think it's like unique to Spindrift. I think it's something that a lot of people do, but Spindrift was kind of the first to popularize it. But she has a yarn line that's called, I think it's called like House Fingering and then Cottage DK. I don't know. But it is 50% merino, 50% Shetland, and it's all spun at like a mill that's local to her, and she dyes it in tonals. So this was a skein that I had left over, and I have a pair of socks that I knit in the Retro Zaria sock yarn base, the Mondim, and I really like them. It's a non-superwash wool, but it's made out of like sheep breeds that are kind of like sturdier, like more long wearing, like long wool blends. And I really love those socks. And so I had this yarn sitting in my stash. I decided not to put it in my Vertices Unite, and I just really wanted to knit some socks with it. So that's my sock project right now. I just did the heel flap and gusset the other day, so I'm just past the gusset. I don't like doing the heel flap and gusset. I find it super annoying to knit because you have to work like flat stockinette. And I always do the reinforced heel because, I don't know, I guess people told me to. And I just haven't questioned it. And I feel like it's more annoying to do the reinforced heel because it's harder to like knit the slip stitches. But I guess it's what I do because I found that the cut-in heel, the afterthought heel, those socks don't fit me as well. They kind of like fall down. And these are so annoying to knit, but they do fit my foot better. So I don't know. I hate knitting it because I think it takes up way more time. I don't like knitting it because it's like fussy to knit. And I don't know. If there's a solution out there for me, please let me know because I would love to hear it. I know that one of like the benefits of actually doing the cut-in heel is that it's easier to replace the heel if you need to. You can just like rip it out versus with a gusset. Like there's no way to do that cleanly. You just have to patch it. But enough about how I hate knitting heel flaps and gussets. Yeah, I like this yarn a lot. It is it's kind of scratchy. Like I'm actually just like have it on my hand right now and I'm realizing that it is a little bit scratchy. I think that's from the Shetland. Shetland is kind of like a scratchier yarn breed because the sheep are like acclimated to like harsh island living in Shetland, like on the coast. So the wool is a little bit scratchier, but that's why I think it's going to be good for socks because I think it'll wear well. So I'm really enjoying knitting these. I don't often knit socks that are just all one color. I usually change it up for the heels and toes, but I'm just going to knit these in all one color. And I still have a lot of the ball left. It's a standard, like fingering weight skein. So yeah, I'm eager to see how those wear up. The pair that I have that I knit in Mondim, I have like, there's a hole in the toe, which is weird because I've never had that happen before. And the yarn that I used for the heels and toes on that pair, they were not, the yarn wasn't the Mondim. It was just like a Madeline Tosh, like 75-25 superwash yarn. So I don't know how that hole happened. It's just on one of the socks, but I haven't worn them in a minute. But I like those socks because like I'll put them in the dryer, even though it is non-superwash, like when they're just barely wet, like just a little bit wet, and like they just like firm back up. I put all of my hand knit socks in the dryer when they're wet because like I said, the dryer just like, squeezes them back together a little bit. But I don't know. I found that those Mondim socks, man, they're really warm and comfortable. And yeah, just a little bit, like 5 minutes in the dryer and they're just like so like tight again on your feet. It's really nice. So I almost have this sock done. I mean, there's just a little bit left to knit. It's harder to see where the heel is because it's all one color. I want to say the heel ends about right there. So I have probably like 3 inches, 2.5 of the foot knit. So it's not really that much longer and then I'll be done with this one. I typically don't let myself start another pair of socks before I finished the sock that I was knitting on, but the sock that I was knitting on was, I've showed it before. It's the apple cider socks. Well, that's the colorway, hot apple cider, I think, by Madeline Taj. And I was knitting the Hermione's Everyday Sock pattern. It's like a textured sock, but the colorway is like kind of orange, and it's like very much a fall sock pattern, but I didn't get to finish them in the fall because I was so busy gift knitting, and I just like didn't want to knit fall socks at Christmas, so I gave myself permission to cast on these socks, and I'm glad I did, because I really wanted to knit socks with this yarn for a long time, and I got to use up stash yarn. I'm really trying to be more mindful of my stash in the New Year's. I made a little list of like all the projects I can make with what I have in my stash, and it's a lot. So there will be no stash acquisitions on this episode because I'm trying not to make many or any. But anyway, that is my sock project right now, and hopefully these will be a finished pair by the next time I talk to you. All right, everyone, that is the end of episode 8. I think it's episode 8. It's good to be back and talking to you again. Like I said, I took an unplanned break for the holidays, like gift knitting, and I'm just excited to be knitting for myself again. And also knitting things that I can show to all of you in podcasting. And I don't know, like I said, gift knitting just took so much out of me, and I'm just excited to be excited about what I'm knitting again, and be able to get on here to show all of you the things that I'm knitting. So I hope this podcast finds you well. Any important links that you need should be below. So I have an Etsy shop where I sell my project bags. And you can also find me on Instagram at Speckled Red Co. That is the Instagram handle for my bags, and it's also where I talk about the podcast just a little bit. We'll probably do a knit along for February, but I'm not ready to quite commit to what that will be yet. So hopefully next podcast I'll kind of get to talk about that. But another knit along is happening because the first one was a lot of fun. Anyway, Happy New Year, and I hope you're knitting something fun for 2021.